Hi, my name is Destin Morse. I'm from Waynesboro, Mississippi, and I will be discussing Chapter 10 in our textbook, Radio Broadcasting for Communications 532. So let's get started. Radio broadcasting. Why is it important for us to study radio? There are a few quotations that are mentioned in our book, and I'm adding one that I think deals with radio kind of in a comical way, but explains it pretty well what it is. The first one is, while radio is valued, radio is also taken for granted because it is so pervasive. Radio is sometimes overlooked, just like water or electricity. Now, this is at the National Association of Broadcasters. They bring out a very interesting point. That while we do kind of overlook radio and its importance to us, because it's kind of everywhere, it's like the water or it's like electricity, the radio is the last analog medium not to face the digital evolution and to join into it, and will remain complacent. Will put radio where the 45 RPM record and the cassette tapes are today. Another quotation from the first page in this chapter explaining how if radio doesn't do something to go along with the digital age, well then it will be replaced just like the 45 RPM radio was, and as well as the cassette tapes. However, I am adding another quotation that is not in our text today. When television came along, I had already done more than 10 years of radio work. I thought everyone would want me. I sat around waiting for the phone to ring, and I didn't. By Orson Welles. Now, Mr. Welles has quite of a history in radio broadcasting. Probably one of the oldest and most famous of the radio writers, actors, one of the most influential in my opinion. In 1938, his reading is the radio version of War of the Worlds caused mass pandemic in the upper Northeast. People were getting into their cars thinking that aliens from Mars had invaded New England. And as a result, there are recorded miscarriages and early births. People backed up for miles in traffic, and there's some unverified deaths that were caused according to this. Now, this also kind of proved that in the time that radio broadcasting made the media all powerful, or at least somewhat powerful. However, through the times, we've sort of drifted away from that, which brings us to why is it important that we study radio broadcasting? Broadcasting radio remains important because it's free. There's no subscription or an expensive receiver. Around the world, there are billions of AM and FM receivers. In the US alone, there are more than 800 million radios. Radio technology plays a major role in communications role around the world for populations in political, economic, and social transitions. Those are just what the book says. I believe it's important that we study radio, especially as Christians, to understand as how our message is also impacting those who hear it. While television still has a great deal of influence, radio is the only medium left where individuals cannot not only see the person speaking, but they're completely unbiased based on their voice alone and what the person is saying, thus giving us a greater deal of contextual analysis and having the message have a greater chance of meeting those who are listening, to our listening audiences. So let's examine some background. Radio's history can be traced in the earliest of wired communications. It's kind of back there with the telegraph and telephone. There's no single inventor that can be accredited with the creation of the radio. Rather, a stream of inventors that we know, stream of inventors had made what we know as the radio possible today. Italian innovator, I'm trying to say his name right, Guglielmo Marconi is probably the most widely known radio inventor slash innovator. Oh, now we're on slide 3. It gives you a couple of pictures on the right. The top picture on the right, it shows a series of individuals who are trying to innovate the radio, broadcast the radio, and at the bottom is Guglielmo Marconi, who is the most widely known innovator. So let's go to slide 4. As notable people, dates, and facts, Edwin Howard Armstrong discovered the regeneration superheteronite tuner that led to high-performance receiver. He was awarded 5 patents for frequency modulation. In 1920, the first commercial radio station started broadcasting in AM. AM signals are low fidelity and are subject to electronic interference, which would later lead to Edwin Armstrong's creation of the FM to go further and eventually take the place of the AM radio. In 1961, the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, authorized FM to add stereo broadcasting, which allowed for music to be played at a much higher quality than that was just on standard FM. And AM added stereo in the early 1980s to compete with the rival FM and their arrival of stereo. But AM stereo never quite caught on like FM had. And ultimately, consumers expressed minimum interest in AM stereo. By 1978, FM became more utilized than than AM radio, thus making FM what you probably listen to today if you're in your car, or if they still have Walkmans that people listen to. So we're going to go to the next slide. With all the modern technology going on, the technology that has advanced from records to 8-tracks, cassette tapes, CDs, to MP3 players, to streaming media, was this possibly the death of radio? We can go back and look first at the 45 RPM record. It was easily accessible, relatively economical, and provided desired music anywhere at any time. For the first time in history, a person could afford to take home a record with a certain song or group of songs on it and play it whenever they desire to, unlike the radio, waiting for their favorite song to be replayed and replayed, if they ever replayed it. Next, we know 8-tracks. Now, I was born at the end of the 8-tracks movement, at the end of the penetration of the 8-tracks. So 8-tracks are also known as Stereo 8. They're created in 1964 and made way for cassette tapes, who eventually replaced them. Now, if you go to a yard sale or maybe even a museum, you can see a few of the 8-tracks left, but most of the time they're just for fun. There is a place in my hometown that still has a playable and completely in working function 8-track player, and I think it's really interesting. However, it's not something, it's kind of big and bulky. It's not something I would like to carry around. Then we all know what CD is. If anyone in this class should have been born in the era of the CD or been living in the era of the CD, taking over the cassette tapes, the compact disc replaced all of the tapes, because for the first time you could, it was on a disc and not on a cassette tape. There were some issues with scratching that we all know about, cleaning the CDs, like putting toothpaste on the CD to make it not skip, or trying to figure out a way. I think they put nail polish on it as a teenager. I know I certainly tried all my ways to not scratch up my CDs. But the CD would ultimately lead to MP3. I remember as a teenager hearing the first time that an MP3 compact disc had been available, and my cousin actually had one, and I didn't understand the difference between a CD and a regular CD and a MP3 CD. However, MP3 began to replace the CD. Now you can still buy CDs, of course. However, it's a lot more user-friendly to simply go onto your iPhone or your Amazon account and purchase an entire album for most of the time cheaper than you can purchase the entire CD in itself. So let's go to our next slide. After all the technological advances, the records, the tapes, the CDs, television broadcasting, everything, we had to ask the question, was this the death of radio? But we still see radio today, so the answer would have to be no, with an asterisk. Radio is certainly not as influential as it was in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, where the only news source that individuals had was from a radio. Rather, people now go to Fox News, CNN, MSNBC.com. They have 24-hour news stations on satellite television. Your phone, you can get so many news apps on your phone. So radio has taken this a backseat role. Which must bring to the research question at the end of the slides today. But we're on the next slide, the changing radio marketplace. I'll read a quotation from the book. The FCC elimination of ownership caps mandated by the Telecommunications Act of 1996 set the stage for many of the changes that have taken place in radio broadcasting in the last decade. Now, this was a lot of words that can kind of get confusion if you don't understand. In studying radio, you'll understand that there was caps on the number of radio stations that a group or an ownership group could have had. Now, in 1996, FCC eliminated this cap in its entirety. It was originally, I think, 7, and then it went to 18, and now it's potentially limitless. Now, one person can have X amount of radio stations here and so many in a different area, and unlike before where they were only limited to a short number. This added incentive for innovation. Prior to the limitless ability, there was little to no encouragement for broadcasters to do any innovation or to improve their systems by any means. This caused for a lot of system interference because, well, there was no requirement, there was no real competition. I can do whatever I want and keep my radio station the same like I've done for the last 20 years. So it provided a level that was better for the consumer, not necessarily better for the broadcaster, but it made a better listening experience all around. Analog was still acceptable prior to this. Now, analog then was like 80 years old. Now, analog being around close to 100 years old, prior to this, analog could still be the major radio station. And still under current FCC standards, analog with a few adjustments could be applied. However, most people are beginning to step away from that and go towards the digital revolution. Praise be unto our Savior for that. But this 1996 Act also provided limitless potential to all categories of the radio experience. Prior, say in my hometown of Waynesboro, Mississippi, there could only be 6 or 7 maximum Christian radio stations on the air at this time. Now this providing limitless amounts, just if someone will pay for the ability for the right to provide their own radio show and has the equipment to make a radio broadcast, this would allow for that. To the right on this, we see an almost comical cartoon. Do you think Chris Evans would be less irritating in FM or digital? Now, it's just explaining the difference between the digital age and the FM, and the encouragement that the radio stations had to go digital instead of, say, analog. So let's go to our next slide. Recent developments. There are 4 major developments that have happened in the last few years and are continuing to happen. First, new technologies that offer substitutions for radio. An example, Pandora, other streaming websites that allow you to go straight and pick a channel and design it for yourself. Next, a delivery competition from satellite digital audio radio, XM and Sirius. New voices and low power FM service. New digital audio broadcasting transmission modes that are compatible with existing FM and radio. So let's go to the next slide. New competition. Internet radio, digital audio files, and podcast. While the 3 above are certainly useful, they are beginning to wear away at the effective nature of this standard radio. AM and FM radio is not only easily accessible, it's not easily accessible, but it also does not cater to the individual, and it has potential for interruption. Below I have the logos of several internet, and this is just a few of the many, several of the internet streaming radio stations where you can go and pick out your own personalized channel, and under this there's no interruption if you have a stable internet connection. And because of this, it's beginning to wear down on the usefulness, not the usefulness, but the effectivity of standard AM FM radio. So let's go to the next slide. Satellite radio. Satellite radio launched somewhere between 2001 and 2002. There's not a definite date. There was proposals, patent claims, and then to the actual selling of the equipment for satellite radio. I personally remember as, I think it was around 12 or 13, the first time I ever seen it, was the XM box that you could have installed in your vehicle. And no, I had no clue how much this cost. I know my mom and dad said it was ridiculous that they, satellite television, now satellite radio. However, I do remember in my own lifetime where satellite radio became from not even heard of to a few people have it. Now most cars, in fact my own Hyundai, has a Sirius XM radio receiver in it, and after listening to it on our free subscription for 6 months, I was kind of hooked. So it adheres to the buyer and what the buyer desires. Now certainly AM FM radio has the potential to be desirable and listening to by whatever audience. However, if you are on a pop station, you might have pop from 2000, the 70s, if there was pop in the 70s, I'm not real sure, and to modern day. So you might have a mix between Aretha Franklin, Katy Perry, Michael Jackson, and Blink-182. On the other hand, if you go to a old school rock, that could be as far back as Elvis, or even putting in a little bit of jazz in there at the beginning of rock and roll, all the way to modern day hardcore rock, indie rock, soft rock, southern rock. I mean, there's a series of problems with AM and FM radio stations because they're not specific. The user has no ability to express to the individual companies what they desire, the broadcasting companies. So rather, the companies are relying on customer base, and the only way that they know what they're doing really well or really bad is advertisers buying ads on their radio station because of the number of people reached. Satellite radio has hundreds of channels. There's a 20s on 2, 30s on 3, 40s on 4, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, indie rock, classic rock, southern rock. There's so many radio stations on the standard Sirius XM radio stations that provide with a better listener experience than most of the AM radio. On the bottom left in this, you can see the Sirius by itself, just the dog with the red signals going out on either side. On the complete other side, you see XM radio by itself, just with the signals going out on either side. SiriusXM merged in 2008. I remember being a senior in high school in 2007 and reading and hearing a lot about, I didn't understand a lot about mergers and acquisitions back then, but reading about the merger and how it was considered a monopoly, so they weren't going to allow them to do it. There was a series of debacles that had jumped to. Finally, in 2008, SiriusXM merged together and became SiriusXM Satellite Radio. We're going to go to the next slide. New voices. The FCC approved the creation of a controversial new classification of non-commercial FM station in January of 2000. This was at first an issue due to channel interference. It was a low-grade quality, so the FM station specialists were afraid that this lower grade was going to interfere with their radio stations. However, it has become much more recently endorsed and accepted by most. This allows for smaller communities to have radio stations, and below on this page you'll see an equation, I guess is what you'd call it, as President Obama signing the Local Community Radio Act. President Obama, in a correlation with the FCC, allowed for smaller radio stations, for example, the Little Riley Radio. Each community now can potentially have their own radio station, and making a better listening experience for everyone. We're going to change slides to the new digital audio broadcasting transmission modes. Essentially, analog is nearly a dead machine. The majority of broadcasts has been converted to digital since 2002. With the creation of HD radio, analog has become relatively extinct in comparison to its former glory. The 1920s, 30s, 40s, prior to World War II, where it was the news on radio rather than just music all the time, until after World War II, where it was music and with a little bit of news into it. And then now where the radio has, especially if you're on AM, there's so many talk stations, and it's a wonderful thing, but there's so many Christian radio talk shows. Then, in fact, in my own community, there's 2 secular, I live in a very small community in southern Mississippi, so there are 2 secular music stations and a broadcast of interdenominational, Southern Baptist, Assembly of God, Methodist, Presbyterian, all kinds of radio stations just under the title of Christianity. There are a few laid-back, easy listening stations that incorporates Christian music with other genres of music, but for the most part there is one pop radio station and one country station, and if you go about 15 miles north you can pick up on a, I think it's a jazz and folk kind of music station. So, but this allows, because radio has become digital, a much better listening quality even in the southeast part of Mississippi. Let's flip slides again. Let's look at the current status, examine the current status of radio broadcasting. CC Media Holdings, it's the parent company to Clear Channel Communication, is the largest group owner in the world. More than 110 million listeners each week listen to the Clear Channel Communication broadcast. Each week, nearly 15,859 FM, LP-FM, and AM radio stations are heard. Radio is not a dead animal. However, radio has lost its effectivity and certainly lost its all-powerful nature in the perpetual cycle of mass media. And it is essential that we continue to analyze and discover where radio is going. So, what are the factors to watch? As far as broadcasting is concerned, I think it is essential that we watch the innovation of radio, where radio is going, where broadcasting is going. Is it going anywhere? Is it declining? Are there new technologies to be discovered? Is digital radio going to evolve into something greater, and provide a better listening experience? Then another factor is the need for continued radio. And the localism and sustainability are both part of this, but radio across the world is the only means by which small communities are able to communicate with other communities, or leaders are able to communicate with large. I mean, the television has caught on in a large portion of the world. However, it's not completely penetrated the entire world scheme. So radio is many times the only way by which a government or a group of people can communicate with another group of people. That's localism. That's entirely sustainability. Radio is also the cheapest way to keep communications going. So it provides the localism and sustainability argumentation. Finally, is for pure entertainment. A lot of times my iPhone dies. I'm going down the interstate and I'm the world's worst of leaving my charger at home. and I kind of ran out of my free subscription with Sirius Radio, so right now I'm not paying for it, and have been forced to find new radio stations on my hour commute every day. And I've discovered that radio provides more than just a enjoyable listening experience. You're able to hear talk shows that kind of keep you going. So for pure entertainment, we cannot forget that radio was essentially provided for the consumer and is still fighting to make its way in the entertainment spotlight. So let's flip one more slide to our discussion question. Now I understand it's a long one, but it's interesting to me. Discussion question. Considering the rise of technological advances, the need for instant results, and availability of suitable options, can radio still be considered a major contender in the entertainment race of the United States? If so, does radio have the possibility of becoming the dominant source of entertainment? If not, does radio stand the potential of becoming an eliminated entertainment? And if it does, what venue will take its place? We've understood today that radio broadcasting was essential to the growing mass media growing of mass media in the United States. It revolutionized the way that people communicated. People, not necessarily person to person, but speaker to audience, and entertainment to audience, government to audience. Back at Orson Welles' book, Orson Welles' reading of The War of the Worlds, we find in 1938 that a single reading could cause serious issues when reading just about aliens landing on our planet. But would that happen today? We understand that the perpetual cycle that mass media grows in, and the perpetual cycle that mass media grows in certainly falls and rises as far as influence occurs. So it's important that we study radio broadcasting to see where we're at and see where we're going, and to grow in a communication and entertainment industry. Again, I'm Dustin Morris. It has been my pleasure talking to you guys and lecturing you guys. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, disappointments, or disagreements, please use the comment thing below and tell me exactly what you think. I understand this isn't your traditional YouTube, and this is for a class. However, I do look forward to your feedback. Thanks, you guys. Hope you had a good learning experience.